So Chelsea, thank you so much for being here with us.
Thank you, Varsha. I'm happy to be here.
So what inspired you to write this book, and how did you decide on what issues you were going to write about?
So I wrote Start Now, which is really for like 6, 7, 8, 9-year-olds, because when I was on my book tour for It's Your World, which was targeted to preteens and teenagers about big issues facing our planet and what some young activists were doing about those issues, parents, teachers, older siblings would say, like, are you going to write a book for younger kids? And this kind of rattled around in my brain for a few years, and then I decided it had to be done. So I sat down and I wrote Start Now about some of the questions I really was concerned about when I was in elementary school, and also questions I heard from young kids today that they were really concerned about. And so I hope that this book helps answer some of those questions for kids and also gives them inspiring models of kind of what they can do at home or in their community to really make a difference on the issues they care about.
So you're the mother of 2 young children. Did that influence your writing when you were thinking of, how might I talk to them in the future about politics and culture?
Oh, absolutely. Our kids are quite young, so they're younger than kind of the Start Now audience. They're 2, and my daughter just turned 4 last week, so she's a newly minted and fiercely proud 4-year-old. She tells everyone that she's now 4.
That's a big age.
Absolutely. And everything I cared about before I became a mother, somehow I care even more intensely about now being a mom. And I find myself talking particularly to Charlotte, because she's older, about what's happening in the world and how it affects kids her age, and listening to her already ask questions and hearing how she's already developed a sense of anger for what she thinks is wrong, and kind of empathy and solidarity gives me a lot of hope as her mom. But also just says to me, we have to start these conversations early, because I do think, maybe not at 4, but at 6 or 7, kids really are old enough to start making a positive difference.
Now, the last issue that you tackle is the topic of bullying. Were there specific reasons that you kind of wanted to end on that note for this age group?
One of the things that really struck me on my tour for It's Your World is that in almost every event I was asked about bullying. So even though I didn't talk about bullying in It's Your World, it was so clearly on students' minds, and it was so painful and also really inspiring how often 2 students would stand up together and talk about being allies to protect each other and to protect their classmates from bullying. And just everything that we've seen in the last couple of years with kind of the rise of bullying in schools targeted to kids because of their perceived immigration status or their perceived gender or their perceived sexual orientation. I think sadly bullying has been with us forever, but it's a particularly acute issue now, given trends and also given kind of the rise of online social media bullying. So I just felt like I couldn't write a book about kind of big issues that I'd heard from kids that they were kind of focused on, and not include kind of one of the biggest issues that I'd heard directly from them, which is bullying.
I'd like to dig in a little bit more on that, because we are hearing this kind of rhetoric on Capitol Hill. Sometimes we see it on the president's Twitter feed. So is that something even on your tours you've heard from children that maybe they're experiencing an increase in that in recent years?
Certainly if we look at the work from the Southern Poverty Law Center that they've done in partnership with BuzzFeed and others, where they chart kind of the ostensible causes or justifications that people use for their bullying, some of that really can be tied, sadly, to the president's rhetoric. So, kids reporting that they're being told, to go to the other side of the wall, or kind of girls being, the recipient of just awful misogynistic rhetoric that kind of has been plucked directly from the president's words. So we know that's happening, and kids are really perceptive. They understand that bullying is wrong, and they understand that it doesn't come from nowhere, that it probably does come from somewhere. Now, sometimes it comes from what kids are hearing at home, because anger, sadly, is the main mode of communication at home, and sometimes maybe it's coming from what they're hearing from the president. And so trying to help kids understand that it's never okay, regardless of where it comes from, that it's always right to stand up to a bully. Sometimes you can stand up to a bully on your own, and sometimes you have to ask a trusted adult, but that we all can be allies.
Yeah, that's great. Now, you yourself deal with your fair share of online social media abuse that you've kind of mentioned, and I find it remarkable how you respond to them sometimes, because you kind of troll your trolls back, or you respond with kindness, you welcome them or you thank them. Do you find that that is a more effective tactic? I would just love to hear about.
I don't know. I mean, I've seen no studies on kind of how the response of kindness, because I always respond with kindness because I think kindness is really powerful and it's what I want to see more of in the world. And so it's kind of what I believe is important for me to kind of put out in the world, either kind of actively or reactively. I haven't seen any studies as to whether or not that's an effective tactic for trying to kind of blunt bullying, but I certainly believe that particularly when we talk to children, we're trying to help them understand that kindness isn't weakness, that kindness really can be a form of bravery, that kindness is an expression of strength. I think it's important that we talk about that as being true, whether it's on a school bus or Facebook, whether it's on Instagram or like a playground. And so I try in my own small way to model that, and I definitely think of my kids when I'm doing that.
Yeah, I feel like that takes an incredible amount of patience.
Oh, well, I think for better or worse, it's something I've been dealing with my whole life.
Yeah.
And I've never wanted to respond in anger because I've always realized that whatever the bully is saying, it's about them and something I think that is kind of broken or not quite working right for them. And it's not about me. And so if I can show kind of kindness and compassion, hopefully that not only helps stand against bullying, but may help at least someone along the way.
Yeah, I think that's an important perspective. Now your book drops just in time for the midterms. We're about a month out. What would you say to young people, obviously a little bit of an older age group than this book is targeted at, but historically turn out as low for the midterms? So what would you say to young people to get them involved?
I would say that whatever issue you care about, it's on the ballot. If you care about the environment and fighting climate change, when scientists say we have about a decade to really make radical changes in how we consume and use energy to try to fight climate change, like, it's on the ballot. If you care about education, it's on the ballot. If you care about healthcare, it's definitely on the ballot. If you care about a woman's right to make her own reproductive choices for herself and her family, it's on the ballot. If you care about gun violence prevention, yesterday was the 1-year anniversary of the tragic Las Vegas shooting. And nothing has happened. We haven't banned bump stocks, despite what the president has said. We haven't expanded background checks. I mean, we've made no progress. So if that's what you care about, that's effectively on the ballot too. So maybe you care about all those things, and that's great. But even if you only care about one of those things, you have to vote in November to make sure your voice is heard.
Yeah. Now you mentioned women's reproductive rights. You've also been a vocal opponent of Brett Kavanaugh for the Supreme Court. What are you most concerned about if he gets confirmed?
Oh, well, I'm so concerned about his judicial record and what we can infer from that as to what he would vote on and how he would vote at the Supreme Court. And I realize there's a lot now about kind of Judge Kavanaugh, and I don't mean to minimize that, but I've opposed his nomination from the beginning because of what I fear his tenure on the Supreme Court would mean for not only women's reproductive rights, but for labor and organizing rights, for fighting climate change, for gun violence prevention, and really every issue that I care about that we were just talking about.
Now, the hearings were a really interesting thing to follow for a variety of reasons. Of course, the accusations of sexual assault. But did you hear when he talked about this left-wing conspiracy theory, and he even said revenge of the Clintons?
Yes, and I was thinking, like, I don't think I had ever heard of you until you were nominated 2 months ago. Like, literally, like, we loom much larger in your head than you loom in ours.
Right.
But to me, that also should be disqualifying. I mean, I would hope that our justices, regardless of however they may vote, in the privacy of their own kind of ballot box, that they would be nonpartisan in their judgment. Yeah. And so even if Judge Kavanaugh had in his hearings gone after President Bush or President Reagan, I would feel the same way. I don't think we can have that type of naked partisanship on the Supreme Court.
Actually, just before this, Jeff Flake came out and said he found his partisanship in the hearings concerning.
Oh, I hadn't even heard that.
It seems to be making an impact on some people. So given the 1-year anniversary of Me Too and talking about young women, I feel like you yourself can kind of personally speak to what it's like to be a young woman going through a news cycle like this. What is your advice to young women today?
Be brave. Like, keep raising your voices. Maybe it's Me Too that kind of helped you find your voice, but don't feel like you have to be defined by something that happened to you or happened to your mother or happened to your grandmother or happened to your friends. If you found your voice in this moment, please keep using it. Maybe what you care most about is education. Like, use your voice to engage on that issue. maybe what you care most about is healthcare. Use your voice to engage on that issue. Maybe you care most about protecting small farmers. Whatever it is, if you found your voice in this moment, don't think it has to be defined only by this moment. And please, please use it for whatever you think is most important.
Now, I think ultimately the message of this book and your previous books is hopeful. You look at the world in an optimistic way.
I do.
But given the barrage of bad news, why do you remain optimistic, or why do you think people should remain optimistic?
Well, Jim Kim, who's the president of the World Bank, said something once that I think about every day, which is that optimism is a moral choice. So every day I make the moral choice to be optimistic, that if I kind of do everything I can with kind of my voice, with my privilege, with my platform to try to make a positive difference, hopefully I'll even be able to make a small positive change. Because if I'm not optimistic, if I'm just cynical, I think that helps protect the status quo. And I have no interest in protecting the status quo. So I think if we do believe things can be different, by definition, we're optimists. And I think if we kind of put our energies where our beliefs are, hopefully that really will help change the world.
And that seems to translate directly to midterms, I think.
From your lips to God's ears.
Well, I saw recently that you also said you're a definite no right now in terms of running for office, but you're a definite maybe for the future. What would have to change to make that jump?
Well, I hope that every young person is a definite maybe. Like I don't think this should just be something that is true of someone who has the last name of a person who's held office or would be in office today. I think that if you are a fundamentally optimistic person, if you do believe you can make a difference, I hope that you, whether you, Versha, or anyone watching, would think about running for office, because certainly as we've seen in this administration, who sits in the White House, but also who sits in Congress, or here in New York, who sits in the governor's mansion, who sits in the State House, who sits in our mayor's office or city council, the public advocate, it all really matters. So for me right now, I generally feel like my family is well represented. I'm a big fan of my local city councilwoman, Carlina, but if she were to leave or something were to change and I thought that I could make a positive impact, I'd have to think, is that the right choice for me and my family? So now it's a definite no, but it's a definite maybe, because I think it should be a definite maybe for anyone and everyone, regardless of where you sit on the political spectrum. If you kind of have a strong view of what's happening and you have a strong vision for what you think should happen, I would hope that everyone would think about running for office.
Yeah. Now, you mentioned kind of your family and your background. I think you've mentioned acknowledging your privilege and, general people's privilege compared to other groups. So I think that's another important topic when it comes to talking to young people. Completely.
Yeah. And I think that it's important that young people understand kind of what it means to be privileged because of the color of your skin, or your immigration status, your gender, your zip code, but also that kind of with that privilege can come real responsibility and opportunity. In some ways to try to erode your privilege, right? I think the most important privilege is what you try to give away by lessening its power. And I think that young people are so curious and so attuned, and I think kids are so much more aware of what's happening than adults maybe are even comfortable acknowledging. And I think they're really ready and more than able to have these conversations about kind of these big kind of structural and systemic issues and how they impact their lives and kind of what they then can do about them. Maybe not in the same language that you and I would use, but I think the concepts are really accessible to them if we explain them in the right way, and that's part of what I try to do and start now.
Yeah. Could you see yourself going even younger for the next book?
Maybe. We'll see how this one does.
Yeah, that's great. Well, thank you so much, Chelsea, for your time. We really appreciate it.
Thank you, Marsha. Thank you so much.